Well, I guess I should watch a tiny bit of footage on Smith and Rakic. Who the fuck knows what's going to happen in that? Is Smith still like a broken man?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing, is that in many ways he's always a broken man.
That's true.
He's always been a broken man, carrying the fragments of his own destruction with him.
Well, now he's carrying the fragments of his own teeth with him.
Yep.
Here for some lighthearted japes about Anthony Smith's negligible cornerman.
There is some kind of vaguely bitter Edgar Allan Poe irony in him having beaten up old men and then losing his teeth. That is way through the light heavyweight division.
I don't know how to feel about that. Just Shogun who, just creaking up to him at the retirement home. Now you know how it feels. Anthony's 33 years old. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe less Edgar Allan Poe, more like Stephen King in one of his more unimaginative phases.
Yeah, more Bubba Hotep than
yep.
Edgar Allan Poe. All right, everyone, welcome to yet another edition of Heavy Hands. Not to make it sound like a thing that just won't go away, but we're back again. Me, your host, Connor Rebush, joined as always by my intrepid co-host, Phil McKenzie. And, well, I think next week, Phil, we're going to take a break from this UFC schedule. Because I don't know about any of you listeners out there, but have you looked at this Overeem versus Sakai card? Because we just did, and we don't like it. But next week's Rakic versus Smith card is pretty interesting, actually. There's quite a bit of varying kinds of interest. For example, after talking about that main event, Smith versus Rakic, we're going to be talking about the co-main event, Robbie Lawler versus Neil Magny. And I'm sure we'll be very sad and despondent after discussing that one. It does offer a little bit of everything, though. It's looking all right. So, if you, like us, are becoming somewhat fatigued by the UFC schedule, look forward to next week's episode. We're going to cover some kind of topic. We haven't decided yet. Maybe we'll get a guest on. One of these vaping scooter lads, perhaps. Or maybe an adult. I don't know. Phil, any thoughts?
Sounds like a crazy idea. Adults?
Phil.
How will we appear like the grown-up ones then?
Yeah, Phil, being English, prefers to mostly consort with and speak with children. Well, let's see. Sorry, this is one of my worst intros ever. We're going to be talking about Frankie Edgar versus Pedro Munoz later as well. Bit of a controversial decision there. We'll give our thoughts, of course, not only on the scoring, but on all of the action. And it's a sad fact, Phil, of fights like this that we end up spending more time, I think, arguing about how they're scored than talking about the fights themselves. I'm looking forward to breaking down what happened because, let us not forget, it was a very good fight. A fight of the year contender, I would say. So, all of that after Anthony Smith versus Aleksander Rakic. And if that doesn't get you excited, I don't know what will. Phil, tell me about light heavyweight.
I mean, this is a sorting match in the light heavyweight division, yeah. I think, and possibly Anthony Smith's last gasp at sort of being an elite light heavyweight, which in retrospect doesn't really seem like it lasted all that long.
No. It was a very matchmaking dependent run, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it was a combination of sort of old people and also prematurely old people in Alexander Gustafsson, and then one really one-sided fight against John Jones.
And the lone quality win over Volkan Oezdemir. which will forever haunt Oezdemir. That's Oezdemir. I don't know. Depending on how Smith looks here, that could be Oezdemir's Bader versus Ortiz moment.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about it, I have done Anthony Smith a disservice in forgetting that one, because that really is sort of his most legit coherent win.
Yep.
Up at 205. But yeah, so for this fight, he's basically fighting maybe not the coming man in the light heavyweight division, but sort of one of them.
Sure.
Rakic is coming off had a somewhat unfortunate loss to Volkan Oezdemir, which derailed him slightly. But other than that, he's been, together with Reyes, he was one of those guys that people were on the lookout for on the come up in the light heavyweight division. And I was kind of happy after that Oezdemir fight, because after that I felt like I finally understood Aleksander Rakic, and because I'd never really gotten him before, who he was. He just seemed like a collection of sort of athletic kicks.
You had yet to find his sort of archetype. What kind of fighter is this man?
Yep. So after that fight, I was like, oh, he's Thiago Santos version 2.
Yeah. He's a less idiosyncratic Thiago Santos, which does make him in some ways a much worse Thiago Santos.
In some ways, it makes him a better Thiago Santos.
Exactly.
I don't like that.
Exactly. What if Thiago Santos, but not quite as wild on the counter, just a little tighter, and also has never been submitted by Eric Spicey or knocked out by Dave Branch. These are notable differences between the next generation of light heavyweight contender. No, I mean, that really opened my eyes. As soon as you said that, I can no longer look at Aleksander Rakic without just seeing a slightly scrawny, pale, less charismatic Thiago Santos. But the style is very much the same idea. A lot of movement around on the outside to set up big, naked kicks that are so powerful that most people don't want to counter them, even though they're not set up. They're quick and they're hard. And then, otherwise, sort of a lot of just drawing his opponent into overcommitting so he can swing huge power combinations at them on the counter. Very much Thiago Santos' game. But just a little more staid, shall we say. A little more relaxed and professional seeming. And I do agree, by the way, I think he won this fight with Volkan Oezdemir. So I don't know. The question is, Anthony Smith, is he alive after what happened to him in the Glover Teixeira fight? Is it possible that his team is just sort of using old footage of Anthony Smith on old Zoom calls and just sort of pretending that he's alive, and Aleksander Rakic is going to walk into the cage and realize that he's alone?
I mean, yeah, we do know that he's alive because unfortunately he was he went on that big rant about how his corner and the referee should just let him die or whatever. After that hideously uncomfortable beating that we had to watch.
Yeah. I can't even recall what he said. All I remember is me mocking him by quote tweeting whatever he said and doing it with lisp voice because all of his teeth fell out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't enjoy that.
Monster. That's all I can remember as well.
But the point was there. We shouldn't be listening to this guy with none of his teeth about whether or not his fight should have been stopped. It's not his decision. Yeah. So, I mean, on the one hand, I wonder what Anthony Smith will look like. In some ways, I mean, that could have been his most successful therapy session to date. What could possibly happen to him in an upcoming fight that would be worse than the prolonged beating he suffered at the ancient hands of Glover Teixeira? On the other hand, not good for his health. And then on the other hand, is the fact that, as we sort of alluded to at the top, I don't even think I can say I'm not sure how good Anthony Smith is anymore. I think I feel that he's not very good. And I think we saw a lot of the sort of long running problems, of Anthony Smith's career resurface, or they were really highlighted, at least in that Glover Teixeira fight. Some problems, in fact, that I thought he'd kind of gotten over. And it's feeling now more like the light heavyweight division is just way more forgiving, in some ways than middleweight, or was he even a welterweight at one point, or was he always a middleweight? Always a middleweight.
Yeah, I think he was always a middleweight, but he's fought some people who have fought all over the map.
Yeah.
I mean, Josh Neer, of course.
Right. So, I think, for example, we've seen flashes of a good Anthony Smith at light heavyweight. Every once in a while that jab comes out and you're like, hey, this guy's got long arms and he knows how to use them. He's actually he can pivot with that jab. He keeps his stance well. He doesn't overcommit to it. That's a nice shot. Oh, look, it sets up that lovely right hand. And a problem that used to occur throughout Anthony Smith's career as a middleweight was that he would beat people up using his height and his length, and then he would get really tired, and then he would just get thrashed. And, hence the Lionheart nickname, I guess. He would just he had to sit on a lead and then survive to get many of these wins, or he would just finish the person, before they could get the chance to start breaking him down. And we didn't see a lot of that at light heavyweight. In fact, that eminently weird win over Volkan Oezdemir, he did get tired, and he still beat Oezdemir, because Oezdemir also got tired. But man, against Glover Teixeira, I think we really saw it emphasized, because, as you put it to me before, Phil, it was in many ways a very forgiving matchup for Anthony Smith. That here he had an opponent who, yes, was going to come forward and knew he needed to come forward, but was not explosive. Didn't have a particularly varied way of coming forward either. It's still basically the same 3 Glover Teixeira punches. And man, he lit Glover up with his reach and that jab. He got all the opportunities he needed, to use his length and control that fight. And it turns out that even in those circumstances, Anthony Smith will undo himself. That getting the exact fight in which he looks like the best version of Anthony Smith, it just leads to his unraveling. Unless he finishes you, he's just going to get tired. It makes you wonder why, right? Because it's not like you shouldn't be getting tired throwing jabs as a pro fighter.
We talked about this dynamic before. That Anthony Smith is a visibly extremely insecure fighter.
It must be that.
And that, I think, and this is the thing, is that Teixeira was slow and plodding enough that Smith's defense, which is pretty much his offense, that it's just the fact that what has really helped him over his career is that he's able to lay down more and more damage on people before they get close to him.
Yep.
But I think, the problem in the Teixeira fight is that Teixeira was able to simply absorb it and come through. And once he got past the jab, there really wasn't a lot there anymore, right? Because Smith is foot slow. He wasn't able to just basically run away like Gustafsson did. Despite his height,
he's never developed much of a clinch game.
Yep.
Which would be really helpful, but nope.
And I think once he realized that was happening, his confidence got blown out the window. So I think, but that's one kind of problematic matchup. I think the other kind is someone who's going to counter his shots and someone who can blitz inside his range much faster and more effectively.
And can also, like Thiago Santos before him, who beat Smith, can also just do damage from long range.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was going to say. Of all Anthony Smith's UFC fights, the most crushingly one-sided was the absolute shellacking that he got from Thiago Santos.
Yep.
Who, just beat him up really easily. So, yeah, I mean, it seems like I just have to favor Rakic here, really. I wouldn't say he's defensively good, but he's not that easy to hit, and he's not easy to hit cleanly.
Mm-hmm.
He's not easy to hit risklessly.
No,
like
he will hit you back.
Like you said with the Santos thing, he's always swinging back.
Yep.
He chases people on the retreat, which I think will be pretty scary for Smith. He's got things like that Manoa combination punches into kick knockout.
He even lands some nice shots on clinch breaks. It's actually a fairly consistent thing of his, which is, if you're going to like crash into him trying to strike him, for example, you might even pay after the exchange.
Yeah.
So.
And like you said, he can handle himself at long range anyway. I mean, I think given the dynamics of the division, and I think the way that Smith has cleaned up on his punching and so on, I think there's still got to be a bit of an early, a bit of a, perhaps, maybe not a scare, but some early struggles for Rakic, where he tries to get past the jab. I mean, apart from anything else, something he also shares with Santos, his cagecraft is rubbish. He just lets himself get backed up and then just goes, "Bah!" and jumps out and tries to scare them off. So, that might conceivably lead to some problems, especially, like you said, I mean, Smith is still an offensively ferocious fighter.
Yeah.
But, once Rakic can get past the jab, I mean, I think Smith is more offensively capable, but he's much less technical and composed fighter than Oezdemir, and Rakic pretty much managed to beat him. And I think if he's losing that kind of fight, I'm just not sure I really trust Smith to survive.
Yeah. Rakic is even bigger than Thiago Santos, at least according to Wikipedia. So who knows? I mean, who knows if that's true? We ran into some slight issues last week with finding different reaches and reach statistics for Frankie Edgar on different websites. So who knows? But he's according to Wikipedia, 2 inches taller and longer than Thiago Santos. So, yeah, it doesn't feel like a good one for Smith. I think what I really want to know, because before we began this segment, before we began the show proper, I was of course telling you that having experienced the comparison now between Rakic and Santos, I now love Aleksander Rakic, a man who I was pretty much ambivalent towards before, but now I get him. So I understand. I'm on board. You were of course pushing back because, as we noted, he's not as charismatic. He doesn't say crazy things like how much he wants to murder his opponent with a knife and stuff like that before the fight begins. He doesn't have funny interviews where he's talking about how his corner told him to do something completely different from what he immediately started doing. He doesn't have the losses to Eric Spicely and Dave Branch. All of these little factors just make him a more boring Thiago Santos. Is it possible though that he could achieve that sort of peak boringness that say a Rafael dos Anjos achieved? And that becomes, in a way, his calling card. He's this crazy, exciting fighter who is so powerfully uninteresting as a person. I mean, I feel like if you're not going to go full Thiago Santos, you should go full RDA.
I mean, I feel like that's acceptable if you're in a good division, but I'm not willing to accept good fighters trying to be just good at light heavyweight. This is the division for comedy, and I'm not going to accept any of these people who are just going to come along and they're just going to be like, oh yeah, I'm a good prospect and I've developed my skills and now I'm going to fight for the title. Get out of here.
Yeah, fuck you. Be more ridiculous. Okay, well, let's take a break. When we come back, we still want to talk about at least one more fight from this card. I'm not sure if we'll have time to cover anything else. Of course, we absolutely would have talked about Ricardo Lamas versus Ryan Hall, which is both silly and genuinely fascinating as a matchup. But it's now Ricardo Lamas versus, my apologies for mispronouncing your name, guy I've never heard of, Bill Algeo, or Algeo, something like that. Who cares? So we're going to at least talk about Robbie Lawler versus Neil Magny, which at least has high potential for being heartbreaking and and disheartening and all sorts of other sad words, including the word heart. And after that, Frankie Edgar versus Pedro Munoz and whatever else we want to talk about from last weekend's event. After this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're talking about Robbie Lawler, Neil Magny, slotted for the co-main event of this Smith versus Rakic card coming up this next weekend.
You know, it really sounded like you said slaughtered for the co-main event for a second there.
In the small octagon, no less. Also known as the charnel house. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think anyone who loves Robbie Lawler is probably... Anyone who loves Robbie Lawler and has not wisely buried themselves under layer upon layer of self-delusion probably comes into this matchup feeling like it's going to be really depressing. All I can imagine, I mean, there's the fact that Neil Magny has looked quite good lately. That's something. But there's also that fight he had with Carlos Condit back in 2017. Remember that?
Yep.
Not a good fight. But one that Carlos Condit, beloved action fighter, definitely lost. And the idea that he is going to deliver the same fate, he's going to make Robbie Lawler look not only bad, but boring. That's something I don't know if I'm ready to cope with just yet. What do you think?
So, yeah, I mean, this seems like, again, kind of something that would have been... Well, so we talked about Munoz Edgar last week, and we said that we thought that was a pretty... Like, it was a pretty good matchup for Frankie in a lot of ways. But, like, the way Munoz fought, his guard, you know, the pace, the coming forward, all this kind of stuff. It seemed like it would actually make for a reasonable matchup against Frankie Edgar. And that was true. Even a deteriorated Frankie Edgar gave him a hell of a fight. So this one is more... This is a fight where Magny is, like, undeniably a worse fighter than Robbie Lawler in the aggregate, or at least was a worse fighter.
Yeah.
Or a worse fighter than Robbie was, let's say. But he'd also probably be, if not the worst person that Robbie's ever lost to, then in the bottom 3 or 4.
But at the same time, possibly a guy who would have always been rough for him.
Exactly, yeah. That's the thing. I think if we're talking a long, mobile, very active fighter, who is powerful in the clinch, and like goes for a lot of takedowns in the clinch, those things seem like they would trouble Robbie Lawler even on his best day.
Right. Because
we've seen him give much too much time and space to long-rangey opponents in the past, namely even, you know, relatively foot-slow ones like Rory McDonald, but also to like Carlos Condit.
They don't even have to be long, they just have to play long and rangy. Johnny Hendricks picked my man apart for long stretches with kicks and jabs.
Yep. I mean, the Renato Sobral fight is one of the more, like, concerning ones. It's always been one of the ones which has made me think, like, man, maybe Robbie just really doesn't like fighting kickers at all. And yeah, I mean, the main problems with Magny are that he's really vulnerable to, like, low kicks taking him out of his jab.
Right.
He's really vulnerable to concerted pressure, and just a bunch of stuff that Robbie Lawler doesn't do and has never done.
Yep. And while, certainly, as we saw in his fight with Kelvin Gastelum, susceptible to some wild bursts of violence, don't know how many of those Robbie Lawler has in him anymore. B, I think Magny's less susceptible to those now than he used to be. Cause, the fight with, a win over Rocco Martin was good, but in particular, that fight with the Leech was really impressive. That was him dealing with what I imagine will be a somewhat similar dynamic to what Robbie Lawler offers here, probably with less, insistence on creating the clinches that lost the Leech that fight. But in terms of, getting like an opponent who felt like he couldn't bridge the gap, so he had to go into counter mode, and Magny just playing with his mind and eating him up with all of these flicking, tapping jabs. Yeah. I don't even know how much more I have to say, to be honest. I just think Robbie Lawler will lose that fight, and I don't think he's going to get a lot of opportunities to turn it around, which is all you could really hope for at this point, is that he will just catch Magny with something big, and either finish him or do that once in 2 different rounds.
Yeah. So I guess the question is, can he finish Magny early? The thing is that Robbie Lawler hasn't really been finishing people much for a while.
No.
Admittedly, he's been either having tough fights or losing them. But when was his last early finish?
Early finish? Cause the last finish was Rory McDonald. It was Josh Koscheck. In 2013, he finished him in the first round, or arguably Bobby Volker in the beginning of the second round.
Oh my god, the Koscheck fight was 7 years ago?
Yep.
I remember watching that thinking,
yep.
How is Robbie Lawler still this good now? He's so old.
Yeah. It's like, man.
I'm like,
his guard sweep game was really legit. He would really pounce on that opportunity. That was awesome. And now he's 7 years older than that.
Right.
He's 38. Jesus. Oh my god.
So yeah, I think, Lawler does understand the dynamics of fights like this. I've sometimes characterized him myself as someone who is sort of broadly indifferent to, strategy that isn't his kind of strategy.
Yeah.
He's just going to be like, no, I'm going to figure it out and fuck you if you're going to try and tell me different. I'm going to fight this guy how I want to. I'm going to spend my durability doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to either have my answer my own way or I won't. And fuck off if you think otherwise. But we have seen him against people where it was in his interest to start quickly and aggressively doing so. I think the best example here is the Cerrone fight.
Sure.
But this also, showed some of the problems with that kind of approach. Lawler couldn't finish Cerrone, even though Cerrone is eminently finishable.
Yep.
Even when, Lawler was basically going full out after him at the beginning of the fight. B, Lawler being aggressive, like you said, he crashes into the clinch a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And, Magny is very, very good in the clinch. He's extremely strong. He's, just really tall. He stretches out people's posture and breaks them down. Mm-hmm. He's it's not going to be a great time for Lawler if he does that.
Give Neil Magny underhooks, and you're going to have a bad time. All the leg entanglements, all the trips, very,
yep.
What's the word I'm looking for? Frustrating clinch game.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think unless people have, the ways to get to Magny, if, cause it's not difficult to get him backing up or getting him into the cage, but it's really about, being able to pressure into mid-range and holding that slice.
Yeah.
Or just having an elite wrestling game.
Yeah.
And, Lawler doesn't do those things, or at least he doesn't hold the mid-range with his pressure unless he's convinced of his reads. unless he's spent those rounds to figure the opponent out, and he's, in the 4th, 5th round of the McDonald fight kind of zone. And I just don't think he can do that this time. Don't think the pace, the size, none of it seems right.
And despite throwing them very, very well, consistent problem throughout Robbie Lawler's career, he just doesn't kick. Every once in a while he'll bring out the kicking game and you're like, oh, he's good at this.
Yeah.
And he just doesn't do it. So there's really no reason for me to suspect that Robbie Lawler's going to win this. I mean, I don't know. Not even talking about Lawler's early finishes. Who has finished Neil Magny? Who has knocked Neil Magny out early? Lorenz Larkin with a body kick. And Dos Anjos knocked him down and submitted him. Maia submitted him.
Ponzinibbio, right?
That was his 3rd round.
That's the thing.
4th round.
Was that the 3rd round?
4th.
Oh my god.
He just chewed him up for 3.5 for over 4 rounds. So Robbie Lawler can't do that. He just, even if there is the violence, it's not sustained. It's not sustainable at this point. I think more at this point than at any other point in his career. So, yeah, I just feel like even if he has a great round where plays exactly the right gambit and really pours it out there trying to put the scare into Magny, I just don't have any confidence because remember also what happened after that first round against Donald Cerrone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had to take the 2nd round off, as he always does after he starts aggressively.
Took it off completely. Did almost nothing in that 2nd round. So, nothing offensively.
Yeah, I mean, anyway. That shape was very reminiscent to the 2nd Hendricks fight.
Mm-hmm.
Came out super aggressive, and then he was just like, right, need some time to get all that energy back.
Yep, or the Condit fight. He put it off for a round, but big burst in the 2nd, nothing again until round 5. So
yeah, and Magny's problems are that he's vulnerable early, but he's incredibly consistent in terms of his pace.
Yeah, and very, like I said, very tough, underrated durability, Neil Magny. Mm-hmm. So, yep, Neil Magny, he's going to make us all sad. I think he's going to beat Robbie Lawler, and he stands a very good chance of making him look bad in the process. I think the best we can hope for as fans of Brutal Bob is that he just sells out and just goes for it. Just give us at least 1 round of you really making the effort, and then I can accept the disappointing loss after that, I think. All right, well, I think we should maybe move on. There's a couple other good fights in here. I mean, there's Alexa Grasso versus Ji Yeon Kim. Somehow, Iwon Kutalaba just thrashed Coronavirus and is now once again rematching Magomed Ankalaev. It's been rescheduled. That was only 2 weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
If that.
I mean, clearly one of the more effective treatments for COVID-19 is just pure rage.
Yeah, anger and CrossFit is apparently the way to whoop COVID's ass. But I think we're going to move on to talking about Frankie Edgar and Pedro Munoz because, well, it was a great fight. And it was controversial. I guess we should talk about the scoring first, and then maybe, in fact, we'll break and come back to revisit it on a technical level in segment 3. How'd you feel about the scoring in this fight? A lot of people were very, very incensed that Pedro Munoz did not get the nod.
I was not mad about the scoring because I rarely am. It has to be really bad for me to be pissed off.
Yeah,
but I did think it was a relatively clear Munoz win.
Yeah.
I think there's to find 3 rounds for Frankie, and that's to find 3 rounds for Frankie. I think the one that you have to give him, which I can't give him, is the first.
Yeah, I agree. And they were all. I mean, let's be clear. There are only 2 really clear rounds in this fight. It's Edgar in round 2 and Munoz in round 3. Those are the rounds where everyone agrees. That's what I'm saying. And the margins were quite thin in all the other rounds. They were all competitive, for sure. Was what made it a great fight. But I have come around to your feeling, basically. Watching it live, I mean, I thought Munoz won. I think I gave him the last 3, with some degree of confidence. And I was unsure about the first. And so my feeling was like, I'm not really that upset about it. Like, these margins were so thin. It was a very close fight. I get it. Having revisited it, that first round is not an Edgar round, in my opinion. That he just doesn't land cleanly enough compared to all the shots. Like, Munoz just has the better shots in 3 or 4 of these 5 rounds. And I don't really actually think it's all that disputable anymore. So, I mean, it was still super close. I'm not I'm not outraged or whatever by the decision. I can see where you would get your case for Frankie. It would have to be rounds 1, 2, and 5. And honestly, I think round 5 is probably a better case for Frankie than round 1, as I think you agree.
Yeah.
Because he hurt Munoz in that round. He landed the most effective single shot of the entire fight in that round. So I get it. And I think if you were to say that you gave Edgar rounds 2 and 5 and scored it for Munoz, you would mirror my score exactly, and I would say that is the correct score. But it was a great fight. I just don't want that to be lost in all the scoring discussion. And while it's probably the least surprising of all the people that could move down in weight at the ends of their careers, Frankie Edgar moving down to what, compared to everyone else's weight cuts, is his normal natural weight class. If we're looking at this relatively, he looked very healthy on the scale. It's the least surprising, but I have to say, he looked really good. For a 38-year-old man making, we talk all the time about the adjustment periods required, for your first visit to a new weight class and everything. Everything must feel different as well. Like, I don't know what his sparring partner situation is like, but here he is going against someone who the reach advantage feels different for Frankie Edgar. The speed of his opponent must feel different. It's also in the small cage, which made it kind of difficult to play his back foot style. All of these factors which could have really been going against him. And despite the fact that I do pretty confidently think he lost this fight, I thought he looked pretty great, actually.
Yeah. I mean, this is, I compared it to, Silver Brunson in that, I don't really take it as a win. In both cases, I feel like the old name fighter kind of robbed the other guy, but it's still remarkably impressive.
Yeah.
Considering, it's remarkably impressive considering where that person is in their career at this point. I mean, bantamweight, as we've mentioned, is a ferociously challenging division, loaded with dynamic, dangerous fighters. Pedro Munoz is one of those. He's incredibly tough. Any kind of sort of strength or physicality advantage Edgar might have had from dropping down was going to be harder to come by against this guy. So, I mean, even sort of having a competitive back and forth fight, I think, earns Frankie a lot of respect in my book. And I think my score is exactly the one, you mentioned. I think it's
Munoz 1, 3, 4.
Edgar. Munoz 1, Edgar 2. Munoz 3 and 4, and Edgar 5.
Sounds perfectly defensible to me. I mean, you got to give Frankie Edgar some credit. Not that people don't. I mean, he's still a fan favorite, I think. But the 3 divisions that he has now moved through, they are the toughest in the sport and certainly in the UFC. They are the 3 best divisions: lightweight, featherweight, and bantamweight. And he has at least been very competitive at points in all of them. So, respect to Frankie Edgar. We're going to talk a little more, I think, about the tactics. There were a lot of momentum swings in this fight, which is what I really liked about it. There were all of these layers of adjustments that we kept having these. I mean, you can just look at the scores and understand to some extent that this was quite back and forth, with each guy coming up with an adjustment that genuinely worked against the other, and that happening again and again in succession. So we're going to talk about some of those details in addition to, let's see, nothing else from this card. Because I do recall now last week saying how we weren't interested, but there were some other things. We'll try to visit whatever technical details jump out at us after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are continuing to talk about Frankie Edgar versus Pedro Munoz. A couple other fights in this card that we do want to visit in just a moment, but I think they'll be relatively brief. Because, as you may have guessed from last week's coverage, or from, watching the card, you sick, depraved bastard, most of it just wasn't really worth caring all that much. Edgar Munoz, though. Momentum swings, Phil. Momentum swings. It's the defining characteristic of most great fights. And this one really towed that line, I think, between action fight and chess match. The vaunted chess match that we always talk about and never get. We only ever seem to get really boring fights described as chess matches. This one was, it was more or less the same pattern, I think, throughout the fight after the first round. But it revealed itself in different and interesting ways with each iteration. That pattern was, as I saw it, Frankie Edgar coming out equipped with whatever Mark Henry had told him to do. And they have always had Frankie is Mark Henry's first professional coach. And I think, Mark Henry is Frankie's first pro coach. And I also believe, if I can recall our interview with him from ages ago, that Frankie Edgar is Mark Henry's first ever fighter.
Wow.
Their relationship basically is they brought each other to the game. And they've always had a special sort of understanding on that sort of Matt Hume, Demetrius Johnson level. They really seem to get the way they communicate. So I think Frankie is, he's always been described as eminently coachable, but I think he's particularly coachable by Mark Henry. And each round he would come out with just something a little different, like the wrestling attempts in round 2 were a change that made they had a serious impact on how Munoz was able to continue pressuring. And they allowed Frankie, I think, to land with a lot more cleanly with shots. And then in round 2, I don't think he got any significant adjustments because he'd done so well. And Munoz found the adjustments seemingly on the fly, started to land. But each round, Edgar would come out and land some good shots. I think in round 4, it was the uppercut that Mark Henry wanted him to look for. He noticed that Munoz kept covering up and ducking down. He wanted him to come out and immediately fire off that uppercut after a jab, and Edgar came out and landed it clean. And then Munoz would figure out some way to either work his way back into it, or, I think this was also a factor, Frankie would lose a bit of energy as the round went on, which is not something we're used to seeing from Frankie Edgar, but is certainly not surprising given the new weight class and his age. So it was great. I loved seeing that dynamic play out in all of these different iterations. That what is Frankie Edgar going to do to put a stamp on this round, and then how is Pedro Munoz going to either figure it out or using brute force bash his way through that adjustment to reclaim the momentum of the fight. I don't know. What do you think?
This was a fantastic fight. And yeah, it was very very subtle in terms of the changes that we saw. Because like you said, it was all sorts of pretty much the same thing. Edgar going around the outside, they would have exchanges, and it was just the tone of those which dictated how it went and how the rounds were won. And I think potentially Frankie doing clever old man things like flurrying towards the end of rounds might have helped him to cement some of the rounds that he perhaps didn't deserve. But other than that, I think there was just a lot of fun back and forth going. I thought one of the interesting things about this is that it did make me think about how Frankie's style has been built by, the weight classes that he's come through.
Mm-hmm.
Because this was not the same as, like, Jose Aldo, and admittedly this is also a contextual opponent thing to think. But this was not like Jose Aldo, who came out and fought like a bigger man, trying to big man Marlon Moraes, for example. This was very much Frankie Edgar's game, simply transplanted down to bantamweight.
Yeah, and at the full like size parity, he really looked like Eddie Alvarez quite a bit.
Mm.
The sort of weird herky jerky footwork, all of the darting lead right hands. That was a big part of his success in this, was that little like hitching sidestep he would do and then just popping in that lead right with that nice little sort of rhythm change on the fly. He did that over and over. It really felt like an Eddie Alvarez, and the body punching. Actually, this was another adjustment that Edgar came out with. I think in round 3 he started going to the body more and leading his combinations with body shots. It did really feel like a classic like Eddie Alvarez versus Justin Gaethje, Alvarez versus the pressure fighter kind of performance.
Yeah, I really didn't think of it that way, but yeah, he did look a lot more like Alvarez in this fight.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it also shows that his style has been built to take on bigger men.
Yeah.
That his approaches are not built to have like sustained exchanges in the pocket. It's always they're not built to establish range.
Right.
They're built to cover range and then be in or out again.
Yeah, that stood out to me. That if somebody had success with the jab in this fight, it was Pedro Munoz.
Oh yeah, exactly. He was dramatically out-jabbed, like pretty much throughout the fight, because Edgar's jab is really traditionally like a blinding tool to set people up for the right hand.
Yep.
So I think, we saw the developments that he made. I think in round 2, like you said, there was the takedowns to throw Munoz off. I think towards the end of round 1, I think Frankie had gotten more into the idea of crashing into the clinch or into close range and then angling out from Munoz rather than just trying to escape him laterally.
Yeah,
I think that was
essential.
Basically what lost him the first round. Is that he kept just trying to escape along the fence.
Yep.
And Munoz was just herding him in with sweeping hooks, and a lot of them were landing pretty clean. And Edgar was like, oh no, I need to use the moment of attack to escape. Which again, quite Alvarez.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there were also times in that first round where Munoz would just press forward without throwing just to force that lateral movement. And then would anticipate and time him with a right hand on the way out or something. Yeah. It makes you kind of think, right? Like, I don't know if he's capable of that level of change at this point, but when he did jab Frankie, he was very successful. You know, it's not like it's all that hard to hit Pedro Munoz with a jab. It makes me want to see a version of Frankie Edgar, which is just like, you've got some reach in this division, man. Just pop that left hand out there and keep it between you and your opponent as often as possible. But I just don't know how comfortable. I mean, it really was like a classic sort of Frankie Edgar performance with a couple of specific adjustments, but they felt just like adjustments specific to the opponent. It was nothing different about 135 Frankie that I could see. How about Pedro Munoz? I mean, is he just kind of got the guy he's going to be? That's kind of the feeling I get from Pedro Munoz. There's, he's got that nice jab, but like it doesn't really lead to anything. All of these pieces do feel kind of disparate. And they all, of course, rely on the fact that he is willing to just repeatedly pressure. But like, for example, there was a point after the first round where I was like, oh, Frankie's getting tagged more than I like to see. And all Pedro has to do is force exchanges. He's just got to go in there and be like, all right, I'm going to trade with him and he might hit me, but I have quicker hands. I hit harder. He's old. I'm just going to force the exchanges and teach him that he can't afford to do that with me. And he never really did that. I think some of that is a credit to Frankie's sharp offense and good timing, but Munoz, like, he brought very few counters to the table, which was disappointing to me because every time he used them, they worked. Frankie's always been a very counterable fighter. The head movement is not really there after he throws, you know? And, Munoz, like, he actually had some moments of all right defense, but he didn't use any of it aggressively.
Yeah, I think a lot of Munoz's defensive work was, it was just like in terms of dictating space. Because I think that's what made the adjustments interesting, right? Because let's say, so round 2, a lot of that is Edgar using the moment of coming forward as an escape. So he's coming forward and then he was angling out, moving around to the side and potentially, lacing an uppercut under Munoz's arms or whatever as he came out, right? Mm-hmm. I think round 3 was actually one of the most sort of neutral space fight rounds of the fight.
Yeah.
And it was because Munoz was like, okay, so he's using the blitz to escape. So Munoz started leaning more on the jab to draw the blitz out.
Yeah.
And then when Frankie came forward, Munoz actually stepped back. So it wasn't a big, defensive, it wasn't like it wasn't a counterpunching performance, but it was just that it was that he was diffusing the blitz by just, backing away from it. Mm-hmm. And that meant that, whilst the fight was dictated much less in terms, with Frankie being up against the cage, because Munoz was just trying to catch him less, he was actually landing much more cleanly because he could draw him into those jabbing wars and then just back out again once Edgar tries to blitz combination or escape.
Yeah. Because with Frankie's, flurries, some people will unfavorably compare it to Holly Holm, which there's a bit of that. It's sort of like Holly Holm. You can kind of just, if you get out of range of whatever it is, you just don't have to deal with these quick little, weird combinations. Frankie's genuinely much better at actually mixing up those combinations. They might have that sort of rote tempo to all of them, but he will add pieces. He'll mix and match. He's a lot more like Carlos Condit than Holly Holm. I think you're right. Pedro basically figured out he could just disengage and don't deal with that. And then he was the only guy really jabbing all that much, in the back half of the fight. So, and the kicks. So just keep him at range and keep popping him. I'll say this. Munoz used to just be a real slugger. And I did like that at several points in this fight, he received instruction from his corner to just ease up. And not swing so hard. And he looks like he can appear to be quite a slick boxer when he does that. He has a really nice jab. I just want to see it lead to things. I just want to see him double it up. I want to see it lead to a nice, an equally relaxed right hand. I want to see some things flowing off that rather than it just being what it was in this fight, which was, an interruptive, sort of attritive strike that was meant to do damage. I want to see it informing other aspects of his game. I don't know. I mean,
that's the thing, right? You get sometimes it does feel like there's two. There were two Pedro Munozes. There was the one who did jabs, and then there was the one that then there was the other one. Yeah, because when he's decided to jab, it would be pretty much all he would do.
Yeah,
and then he would go back to just low kicks and right hands and big combinations. So yeah, it would be nice to see some more of a synthesis between the two approaches.
But maybe he will get there. I mean, I was saying before that he's probably finished developing, but I don't think we've seen those relaxed jabs out of Munoz much before the last few fights. So maybe that will become better integrated. And if so, that would be great. Cause I think Munoz's style, gives the impression that he's not actually as good a striker as he is. But as a technician, he's very well rounded and very technical everywhere. It's just sort of the connective tissue is a little, a bit corroded or perhaps still forming. Okay. Well, a couple quick words then on just maybe two other fights from this card. Last week we talked about, Mizuka Inoue versus Amanda Lemos. And our basic read was just that Lemos was going to be, the bigger hitter, was just a better athlete and could just afford to have some, maybe, unflattering exchanges with Mizuki Inoue and still win by landing the better shots. That was more or less the dynamic. But you made a comparison just before, that interested me. Perhaps because it was referencing something I said previously. You compared it to our breakdown of, Bilal Muhammad versus Lyman Good. And that was very similar because you and I always look for parallels to try to understand a style dynamic between two fighters. And for that fight, we were thinking, can Bilal Muhammad do what Zaleski dos Santos did? Can he, to Lyman Good, can he use that relentless pressure to overcome the fact that he's not that big of a hitter? Or was the power sort of an essential part of Zaleski's success with that style? And likewise here, we were thinking, well, if Inoue wins, it's going to look something like Leslie Smith's win over Amanda Lemos. But does that work without being, a little more like Leslie Smith? And I think the answer was a pretty resounding no. It just doesn't work. She didn't have enough, there was not enough threat to what Mizuki Inoue wanted to do to even make her moments of prolonged success meaningful. So the end result was that the approach didn't even really get going. Like, she could feel that she wasn't going to have this effect. She could feel that she was going to have to compromise her position, to close the gap and get these shots in. She could feel that she was exposed to Lemos's counters. And so, instead of just her running into the wall over and over and it not working, she kind of like made a decision to stop running into the wall. Is that how you look at it as well?
Yeah, I mean, so I think I picked Inoue. We took opposing sides on this one. And yeah, I think what I was expecting would be to make the difference would be that she's, a better defensive fighter than Leslie Smith. And that she'd be able to, take striking exchanges in a way which Leslie Smith couldn't, in a slightly safer, if less damaging way. Mm-hmm. But watching this fight, I just realized that, the real problem with Inoue was that she's just not a puncher, and this is not in a, she's just way less athletic than Lemos is. It's that she's just she just has bad punching mechanics.
Not a fluid puncher.
Yeah. And, Lemos, for her flaws, is an incredible natural puncher.
Yes.
And so, Inoue just really had to try and replicate the parts of the Leslie Smith game plan that involved, the size and the physical edge. Namely, trying to bully her in the clinch. And I think that probably, it might have tired her out a bit more than it tired Smith out. Than it tired Lemos out. It might have tired Lemos out more than Inoue, but it didn't really matter because it wasn't tiring her out enough to erase the giant power differential.
Right. Yeah, and I think it also connects to another thing I brought up last week, which is the fact that Inoue's defense, which you were hoping to show here, it just doesn't lead to anything, and I think that's probably connected to the fact that she seems to have a mechanical, technical difficulty in advancing on an opponent with a series of punches. She gets her feet out of position. She comes in head first. She's not transferring weight comfortably. She's just in this sort of crouched forward, all my weight's on my front foot. And I'm just just pumping really hard, this feeling of desperation, please don't punch back, please don't punch back, please be convinced by this, please be convinced by this. And I didn't find it very convincing, gotta be honest. So, kinda sad. I still like Mizuki Inoue, but I do feel like I have a really good idea of what her ceiling is now. And, I'm pleased to have called that one correctly, if I didn't get to see her win. I guess the last thing to mention, Timur Valliev got smoked. In the curtain jerker fight here. This is a guy that certainly I think our brethren in the vaping scooter gang were excited to have, because they love anyone who is Russian or Russian-like. They seem to just, I don't know. They love those Eastern Europeans. And Valliev, was, pretty successful, like high level. He was just one of those guys that's floating around outside of the UFC, and you're like, this guy's obviously really good. He's got a very functional, put together game. He's a solid athlete. This is a rankable fighter right here. And yeah, he got blown up by a guy named Trevin Jones. It wasn't even, who was he supposed to be fighting originally, Valliev? It was another Russian prospect, right?
I'm not actually sure.
It was supposed to be Mark Striegel.
Doesn't sound very Russian.
No, but I think he's had fights maybe in like 1 or an M1. He's fought a lot of other Eastern European guys, so I think that's why I had that in my head. But another pretty promising like boxer wrestlery prospect guy was going to be a good fight. He's a lot more raw than Valliev, but there would have been some great scrambles and everything. Instead, Valliev fought this guy I'd never heard of before this weekend on super short notice, almost destroyed him, and then just got smoked with like one perfect punch. He couldn't get the finish. So, I don't know. Is there anything to say about that, really?
I mean, there's not really much to say. I mean, it was so one-sided before that.
It was. He hurt Jones with a front kick to the solar plexus.
It could have been. Yeah, I mean, it could have been stopped in the first round. I think fairly without too much of a ruckus.
Yeah.
And yeah, then he got smoked by one punch on the return. I mean, it is worth noting that like more and more, it's worth thinking that MMA is just about being disgustingly, horrifically durable.
Oh yeah, it matters.
And maybe that's a thing to note with Valliev, but then again, sometimes weird things just happen to people, and it was weird.
Has he been KO'd once before? No, he never has.
No.
First ever KO. Yeah, I mean, there's been no evidence so far that he's got durability problems. I think he just got caught with a perfect punch and probably was in a position where he was feeling really confident and did not expect to be hit that hard. I just think it came out of the blue, really. I did notice like some problems with Valliev while trying to finish Jones. Like there's not this makes sense because he's not really a guy who hurts people and finishes them with strikes anyway. He's basically a sort of all-rounder decision machine for the most part. But he really did not seem to have a good idea of how to put away an opponent who was in full-on Derek Lewis mode. Both hands covering the abdomen. Please go away. Please don't hurt me. I just want to roll up. I mean, he hit Jones and Jones literally just sat down against the cage the first moment that body kick landed. And yet Valliev, like, he couldn't think of any way to attack him other than just lunging in with single strikes and then disengaging again. And they were considered single strikes. They were, most of them landing. But at no point did it occur to him, or he just doesn't know how to do this, to like establish a bit of a rhythm, to put some feelers out there and keep him in this really reactive defensive shell so then you can really line him up for a series of shots. Again, not something he's had to do often before, so I get it. But it's not entirely on the referee, I think. The fact that Valliev did not secure the finish there. He could have simply, you and I were saying this before, he could have simply poured it on with sheer bullshit and forced the stoppage. I think the referee was just waiting for that moment. And this is a lesson that the likes of Valliev could take from Ioane and Jacek, who throws like the silliest, most meaningless flurries ever when she has an opponent shelled up. They rarely, like the famous image of her knocking down Carla Esparza, the final knockdown in that fight, not much of that really lands clean. They're not great punches. But she's just forcing the issue. It's gamesmanship. She's like, oh, this is the point where the referee's looking for an excuse to stop it. I better give him one. So yeah, a lesson hopefully learned for Valliev. Big weird comeback for Trevin Jones, one of two on this card. But that's all we're going to cover on today's episode. That's been most of Heavy Hands. Thank you all so much for listening. I haven't read shit this week, Phil. Do you have some other people's work to plug? Because I'm still on my watching the events, doing my 2 shows, and otherwise working on scouting reports trip. So what do you got to plug?
I did want to say we also wanted to pour one out for Ryan Bader.
Oh, yes.
And by proxy for friend of the show, Ben Cohn.
Yeah. We're plugging the last official meeting of the Ryan Bader fan club.
Yep. Poor Ryan Bader. I was very sad to see him lose because I like light heavyweights to be silly.
Yeah.
And Ryan Bader is silly in his own way, but at least he went out like a real light heavyweight.
Brutally. And
What's that?
Brutally.
Yes, but also just like looking the wrong way and getting kicked in the head.
He tried to do the Romero defense. It turns out it only really works for Yoel to force your opponent to kick you directly in the brainstem. Not great for the Ryan Baders of the world.
Yes, please, no one else try and replicate anything Yoel Romero does in fights ever. Yeah.
I want a version of Ryan Bader that's just like unset up ankle picks and and reliance on chin. Sounds great.
Oh, I would kind of love that, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, Ryan Bader has been sort of fighting people where it didn't really matter how he fought for a while. So,
yeah. I was kind of just looking at his recent record, and when you line them all up end to end, it's it's about 2 inches long, so to speak. It's like Czech Congo is like one of the best names that he's fought, and he didn't beat him. So it's been going back to that Phil Davis win, which is genuinely good, top 5 quality light heavyweight win at the time. And then everything since has really just been beating up old men, which is also a light heavyweight tradition. But, basically we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. We know Ryan Bader. We know what happens when he fights someone who's scary and aggressive and very determined to knock him out.
But we also know that Ryan Bader will be back.
Oh, yes.
But this, like, in all honesty, isn't even like the 3rd most embarrassing loss of his career.
No.
And he's shrugged off way worse before, and he's still got the heavyweight belt anyway.
Certainly. Yeah. I wasn't even thinking of his loss this weekend when earlier in the show I mentioned his loss to Tito Ortiz. So this can't be as bad as that. Nemkov is it's like an offhand reference for really embarrassing losses. So Nemkov is a very credible loss in comparison. And each time Ryan Bader has come back, he's done so with something new. I genuinely enjoy the Ryan Bader comeback trail every time he steps back onto it. So yeah, it'll be good. Bader will be back.
In terms of stuff, I have been, I don't think I've read anything. I did watch, a video breakdown by, I think, Julian Lung.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how that's pronounced, on Twitter, from the fight site, which was called, Aljamain Sterling is better than John Jones, I believe.
Yes.
Aljamain Sterling is a better fighter than John Jones.
I saw this one floating around, but didn't read it yet, or watch it yet.
Yes, and it's very good, and yes, of course he is.
Well, yeah. Let's be real. That was pretty obvious, but it also does need to be illustrated to a great number of people. So, all right, cool. Well, that's been this week's episode of Heavy Hands. Thank you all so much for listening. Like I said, next week, we may have some recap of Smith versus Rakic. It's possible we'll want to say something about, I don't know, Hunter Azure or Julia Avila. But this upcoming card is looking real weak. So if you are, like us, looking for the occasional break from the UFC schedule, we're going to come at you with some kind of topic for the main meat of that episode, and or possibly a guest. So look forward to that. And then, of course, we'll be back to the grind shortly thereafter. Until then, find us on social media at BoxingBush, B-U-S-C-H. That's my handle on Twitter. You can find Phil at Evil Greg Jackson. And that's it. Thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode of Heavy Hands. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. I did that thing I do, Phil. I said the name of the show at the top of the tagline, and Really kind of stepped on.
Dear.
They kind of stepped on the punchline.
Are you going to finish it?
No, I think that's going to be the outro.
This has been Heavy Hands.
Son of a bitch.
Someone had to do it. The tension was killing me.
Yeah.